The blood-stained handkerchief in Rosalie Jenkins' pocket was her only comfort as she fell to her knees, scrubbing the already gleaming floor of the Silver Dollar Saloon while Vernon Blake, the owner, loomed over her with a twisted smile that never reached his cold eyes. Williams, Arizona, 1885, a town on the rise with the coming railroad, bringing prosperity to some and misery to others. For 20-year-old Rosalie, it had become her prison since her father's death 3 months ago, leaving behind nothing but debts that Vernon Blake had been all too eager to claim along with her freedom. "You missed a spot," Vernon said, deliberately scuffing his boot across the wet floor she had just cleaned. "Do it again." Rosalie bit her tongue to keep from responding, knowing it would only earn her another slap or worse. Her once soft hands were now cracked and bleeding, the skin raw from lye soap and endless scrubbing. She had been working since dawn, serving breakfast to overnight guests, washing linens, cleaning rooms, and now on her hands and knees scrubbing the saloon floor before the evening crowd arrived. "When you finish that, the spittoons need cleaning," Vernon added with a smirk before walking away, the jingling of coins in his pocket a cruel reminder of the wages she would never see. The debt, supposedly $200 her father had borrowed for medicine during his final illness, seemed to grow rather than shrink, despite Rosalie's endless labor. Vernon claimed room and board ate most of her wages, leaving just pennies to pay down what was owed. "Rosie," whispered Millie, one of the saloon girls, glancing around to make sure Vernon wasn't within earshot. "You can't keep going like this. Your hands are a mess." Rosalie looked down at her raw, bleeding hands and quickly dipped them back in the bucket to hide them. "I'll be fine," she whispered back, though they both knew it was a lie. "He's never going to let you work off that debt," Millie continued, her voice barely audible over the piano player practicing in the corner. "It'll just keep growing until she was forced to join the other girls upstairs, the unspoken fate Vernon had been hinting at with increasing frequency. Rosalie shuddered at the thought. The doors of the saloon suddenly swung open, bringing with them a rush of hot, dusty air and the silhouette of a tall man. Rosalie kept her head down, continuing her work, having learned that making eye contact with male customers often led to unwanted attention that Vernon encouraged. "We're not open yet," Vernon called from behind the bar where he was polishing glasses. "Come back in an hour." "I'm not here for a drink," the man replied, his voice deep and steady. "I'm looking for a Mr. Blake. You found him." Rosalie peered up through strands of auburn hair that had escaped her once neat bun. The newcomer was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing trail-worn clothes and a dusty Stetson that shadowed his face. Unlike most men who entered the saloon, his gaze didn't sweep over the women like they were merchandise. "Name's Owen Irwin," he said, removing his hat to reveal sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer storm. "I just bought the Matthews place outside town. I'm looking to hire some help." Vernon leaned against the bar, suddenly interested. "What kind of help? Cook, housekeeper?" Owen Irwin's gaze traveled around the room, finally landing on Rosalie kneeling on the floor. Their eyes met briefly before she looked down again, but not before she caught something in his expression, not pity exactly, but a flash of concern. "I might have someone who could use the work," Vernon said, following Owen's gaze to Rosalie. "For the right price." Rosalie's heart sank. Vernon was always looking for ways to profit from others' labor. He would likely charge this rancher an exorbitant fee and still claim she was working off her debt here. "I pay my own workers," Owen said firmly. "Direct. The girl owes me," Vernon replied. "Her father died in debt to me. She's working it off." Owen stepped further into the saloon, boots echoing on the wooden floor. "How much?" $250. Rosalie bit back a gasp. The debt had grown again, apparently. That's a considerable sum, Owen observed, his expression neutral. What collateral was offered for such a loan? Vernon hesitated. It was a gentleman's agreement. I see. Owen's eyes drifted back to Rosalie, noting her worn dress, exhausted posture, and raw, bleeding hands clutching a scrub brush. Miss, he addressed her directly, something few people did anymore. How long have you been working here? Before Rosalie could answer, Vernon stepped between them. That's none of your concern. If you're not interested in an arrangement, I suggest you leave. We open soon. Owen didn't move. I'd like to hear from the lady herself. Vernon's face darkened. She's not available. 3 months, Rosalie said suddenly, finding courage from somewhere deep inside. I've been working here 3 months, 7 days a week, sunrise to well past midnight. Vernon turned, his hand raised threateningly. You keep your mouth shut unless Owen moved with surprising speed for a man his size, stepping between them. I don't believe that was necessary, Mr. Blake. The saloon fell silent. Even the piano player stopped his tune. Vernon's face flushed with anger, but he lowered his hand. Men like Owen Irwin weren't to be trifled with. That much was clear from his stance and the quiet authority in his voice. How much has been paid off the debt in these 3 months? Owen asked. Vernon's hesitation was answer enough. There are costs: room, board, breakages. I see. Owen reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. I'll give you $100 for whatever debt actually exists. The lady doesn't appear to have been treated fairly. She owes me $250, Vernon insisted, though his eyes fixed greedily on the wallet. 100 is generous for a gentleman's agreement with no paper trail, Owen countered. Unless you'd prefer I speak with the sheriff about your bookkeeping practices. The threat hung in the air. Rosalie held her breath. Everyone in town knew Vernon Blake had the sheriff in his pocket, but perhaps this stranger didn't realize that. Or perhaps he didn't care. Vernon's eyes narrowed, calculating. 200. 150, and that's final, Owen replied. And the lady walks out now. The standoff lasted only seconds, though to Rosalie it felt like hours. Finally, Vernon nodded. Fine. But she leaves with nothing but what she's wearing. Everything else stays to cover additional costs. Everything I own would fit in a handkerchief anyway, Rosalie found herself saying, rising slowly to her feet, wincing as her stiff joints protested. Owen counted out the money and handed it to Vernon, who snatched it quickly, as if afraid the offer might be withdrawn. You work for me now, Owen said to Rosalie, his voice gentler than before. Fair wages only. She stared at him, stunned by the sudden turn of events, unable to fully process what was happening. You have anything you need to collect? Owen asked. Rosalie shook her head. The few possessions she'd brought with her mother's hairbrush, a small portrait of her parents. A book of poetry had been lost during her first week when she dared to complain about the long hours. Then we should go, he said, opening the door for her. Rosalie hesitated only briefly, glancing at Millie, who gave her an encouraging nod. Whatever awaited her at Owen Irwin's ranch couldn't be worse than her life here. Without another word, she walked out of the Silver Dollar Saloon into the bright afternoon sunlight and an uncertain future. The ride to the Matthews place, now the Irwin ranch, took nearly an hour. Rosalie sat perched on the wagon seat beside Owen, painfully aware of her dirty dress and disheveled appearance. They traveled mostly in silence, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels filling the space between them. Why did you do that? Rosalie finally asked as they passed the town limits, the buildings of Williams growing smaller behind them. Buy my debt, I mean. Owen kept his eyes on the road. I needed help at the ranch. There must be plenty of people looking for honest work. You didn't need to pay off someone's debt. His hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I recognize injustice when I see it." Rosalie studied his profile, trying to understand this man who had just dramatically altered the course of her life. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and perhaps smiling more than frowning. His clothes were well worn but clean, his manner reserved but not cold. "I should warn you," she said, feeling compelled toward honesty, "I'm not much of a cook. Before my father fell ill, we had a comfortable life. I wasn't raised to be a servant." Owen glanced at her then, his expression unreadable. "What was your father's profession?" "He was a teacher. We came west when I was 12 after my mother died. He taught at the school in Williams until his lungs gave out." The memory of her father, once so vibrant and full of knowledge, wasting away in their small rented room, still brought a lump to her throat. "A teacher's daughter," Owen nodded, as if this confirmed something. "Can you read and write?" "Yes, of course," Rosalie replied, momentarily forgetting her current state. "My father made sure I received a proper education. I can cipher as well, and I know some Latin and French." A hint of a smile touched Owen's lips. "That's more valuable to me than cooking skills. Those can be learned." They fell into silence again as the wagon climbed higher into the juniper-dotted hills outside Williams. Eventually, they crested a rise, and the Matthews place, now the Irwin Ranch, came into view. Rosalie couldn't suppress a small gasp of surprise. She had expected something rustic, perhaps even primitive. Instead, she saw a well-built ranch house of considerable size, a large barn, several outbuildings, and corrals containing horses. It wasn't grand, but it was substantial, the home of someone with means. "It's been empty for about a year," Owen explained as they approached. "Old man Matthews passed on, and his children had all moved east years ago. They were happy to sell." "It's much larger than I expected," Rosalie admitted. "I have plans," was his only explanation as he guided the wagon into the yard. As they pulled up to the house, the front door opened, and an older woman emerged. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple dress covered by an apron. "Mrs. Cooper," Owen called by way of greeting. "I've brought help, as I mentioned this morning." The woman, Mrs. Cooper, approached the wagon and eyed Rosalie with open curiosity but no judgment, despite her bedraggled appearance. "Well, it's about time," she said, her voice warm with a slight southern accent. "This place is too much for one old woman to manage, no matter what Mr. Irwin thinks." She extended a hand to help Rosalie down from the wagon. "I'm Ida Cooper, housekeeper and cook, though caretaker of all things might be more accurate." "Rosalie Jenkins," she replied, wincing slightly as Ida's hand closed over her raw, cracked skin. Ida immediately turned Rosalie's hands palm up, examining the damaged skin with a frown. "Good heavens, child! What happened to your hands, Mrs. Cooper?" Owen interrupted gently as he climbed down from the wagon. "Miss Jenkins has had a difficult time of it. Perhaps you could show her to a room and help her get settled. I'm sure she'd appreciate a chance to rest and clean up." Ida looked from Owen to Rosalie, understanding passing across her features. "Of course, come with me, dear. We'll have you feeling more yourself in no time." Rosalie followed Ida toward the house, pausing to look back at Owen. "Thank you, Mr. Irwin." He simply nodded, already turning to unharness the horses. The inside of the ranch house was as impressive as the exterior, spacious rooms with good furniture, not luxurious but comfortable and well made. Ida led her upstairs to a bedroom that overlooked the mountains to the west. "This will be your room," Ida said, opening a wardrobe to reveal several dresses. "These belong to Mrs. Matthews. She was a bit shorter than you, but they should do until we can get you properly outfitted." The bathroom is down the hall. We have running water, thankfully. Mr. Irwin had it put in first thing. Rosalie stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed. I don't understand. This isn't a servant's quarters. Ida's expression softened. Mr. Irwin didn't mention the specifics of your position here, but I gather you're to be more than just household help. She patted Rosalie's arm. He's a good man, though not one for many words. Get cleaned up, and I'll have a salve ready for those hands when you come down. There's a fresh nightgown on the bed if you'd like to rest afterward. After Ida left, Rosalie sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. Just hours ago, she had been scrubbing a saloon floor, contemplating a lifetime of servitude or worse. Now she sat in a lovely bedroom in a fine ranch house, with no clear understanding of what was expected of her. She was still pondering this when she noticed a small bookshelf in the corner, filled with volumes. Rising, she crossed to it and ran her fingers over the spines: Shakespeare, Dickens, Austen, and more. Who exactly was Owen Irwin, and what did he want from her? The bath was heaven, real hot water, clean soap that didn't burn her skin, and privacy. Rosalie soaked until the water cooled, watching the dirt and grime of the saloon swirl away. She dried herself with a soft towel and slipped into the nightgown Ida had left, a simple cotton garment that was nevertheless finer than anything she'd worn in months. True to her word, Ida had a salve ready when Rosalie made her way downstairs. The older woman clucked sympathetically as she gently applied it to Rosalie's damaged hands. "These will heal," she assured her, "but it will take time. You won't be doing any hard scrubbing for a while." "Then what am I to do?" Rosalie asked, finally voicing the question that had been troubling her. "Mr. Irwin said I work for him now, but he hasn't said what my duties are." Ida finished wrapping Rosalie's hands in light bandages. "I expect he'll tell you when he's ready. For now, you should eat something and rest." She led Rosalie to the kitchen where a bowl of stew and fresh bread awaited. Rosalie ate slowly, savoring real food after months of scraps and leftovers. As she was finishing, she heard the front door open and close, followed by Owen's footsteps in the hall. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his own hands now clean, hat removed. "How are you feeling, Miss Jenkins?" he asked. "Better, thank you," she replied, though confused about why I'm here. Owen glanced at Ida, who took the hint. "I'll just see to those linens," she said, discreetly leaving the kitchen. Owen took a seat across from Rosalie at the table. "I told you the truth. I need help here at the ranch. I've only just acquired it, and there's much to be done. But you have Mrs. Cooper," Rosalie pointed out, "and surely you'll hire ranch hands for the outdoor work." "I need someone with an education," Owen said directly. "Someone who can read, write, and cipher. I'm establishing a cattle operation here, and there will be contracts, correspondence, accounts to keep." Rosalie's brow furrowed. "You want me to be your secretary? Assistant would be a better term." He studied her face. "You have the education for it, and I suspect you have the intelligence as well. Your father was a teacher after all. But why me?" Rosalie persisted. "Why not hire someone from town with experience?" Owen was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I recognized something in you at the saloon. Resilience, pride despite your circumstances, and something else, a spark that place was trying to extinguish." He leaned forward slightly. "I believe in second chances, Miss Jenkins. I've had one myself." Before she could question him further, he stood. "We can discuss the specifics of your duties tomorrow after you've rested. Your hands need time to heal anyway. I pay fair wages, $30 a month to start, with room and board provided. If the arrangement proves satisfactory to both of us after a month, we can discuss a raise." $30 a month was more than many men earned for hard physical labor. For a woman, especially one with no references or experience. It was unheard of. That's very generous, Rosalie managed. It's fair compensation for the work I'll expect, Owen replied. I don't believe in taking advantage of people's misfortunes, Miss Jenkins. His eyes met hers directly. And I want to be clear, your debt is paid. If you decide tomorrow or next week or next month that you wish to leave, you may do so with your wages in your pocket. With that, he bid her good night and left the kitchen, leaving Rosalie staring after him, more bewildered than ever about the strange turn her life had taken. The next morning, Rosalie woke to sunlight streaming through curtains, real curtains, not the tattered rags that had hung in her room above the saloon. For a moment, she lay still, afraid it had all been a dream and she would open her eyes to find herself back in that dismal place. A knock at the door startled her, fully awake. Miss Jenkins, Ida called. Breakfast will be ready in half an hour if you'd like to come down. Thank you, I'll be there, Rosalie replied, relief washing over her. It hadn't been a dream after all. She rose and examined the dresses in the wardrobe. They were indeed a bit short, but otherwise fit well enough. She chose a simple blue calico, grateful to wear something clean and whole after months in the same two threadbare dresses at the saloon. Owen was already seated at the dining table when she came downstairs, reading a newspaper while drinking coffee. He stood when she entered, a courteous gesture she hadn't experienced in a long time. Good morning, Miss Jenkins. I trust you slept well. Very well, thank you, she replied, taking the seat he indicated. Ida brought in plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, setting them down with a flourish. Eat up, both of you. Can't run a ranch on empty stomachs. Breakfast passed pleasantly, with Ida keeping up a steady stream of conversation about local happenings and ranch matters. Owen occasionally contributed a comment or observation, but seemed content to let the women talk. Rosalie found herself relaxing, the knot of tension she'd carried for months gradually loosening. After they'd eaten, Owen invited her to join him on a tour of the ranch. I'd like you to understand the operation you'll be helping to manage, he explained. They walked through the house, first a surprisingly spacious dwelling with 6 bedrooms, a study, a formal parlor, dining room, and a large kitchen with a connected washroom. Every room was well furnished, though some showed signs of having been unoccupied for some time. Old man Matthews built this place to impress, Owen commented as they moved through the parlor. He came from money back east, apparently. It's very grand for a ranch house, Rosalie observed. Too grand, maybe, Owen replied with a slight smile, but it suits my purposes. Outside, he showed her the barn, stables, smokehouse, and other outbuildings. A small bunkhouse stood empty, waiting for the ranch hands he planned to hire. I've purchased 500 head of cattle, Owen explained as they walked. They'll be driven up from Texas next month. I've also got 20 horses, mostly quarter horses for working the herd, but a few thoroughbreds as well. Rosalie listened attentively, trying to absorb all the information. She knew little about ranching, having grown up in town. What do you know about cattle ranching, Mr. Irwin? She asked as they paused by a corral where several horses grazed. Enough to know it's a hard business, he replied, but potentially profitable if done right. The railroad's expansion means beef can be shipped east more efficiently than ever before. And you learned this where? You don't strike me as someone who's been a cowboy all his life. Owen gave her an appraising look. You're observant. No, I haven't always been a rancher. I was a businessman in Chicago for many years. What brought you to Arizona Territory? His expression became guarded. A desire for a different kind of life. He gestured toward the main house. Shall we discuss your duties now? Back in the house, Owen led her to the study, a handsome room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large oak desk. He indicated a smaller desk positioned near a window with a view of the mountains. "This will be your workspace," he said. "Your primary responsibilities will be correspondence, record-keeping, and managing the household accounts. Mrs. Cooper handles the day-to-day running of the house, but you'll oversee the budget and ordering of supplies." Rosalie ran her bandaged fingers over the smooth surface of the desk. "I've never done anything like this before." "You're educated and intelligent. You'll learn." Owen opened a drawer and removed several ledgers. "These are Matthew's old records. They'll give you an idea of the ranch's operation, though I plan to expand considerably." "And my hours?" Rosalie asked, thinking of the endless days at the saloon. 8 to 5 with Sundays off," Owen replied promptly. "I don't believe in working people to exhaustion." It seemed too good to be true. Reasonable hours, fair pay, comfortable accommodations, and work that would use her mind rather than break her body. Rosalie waited for the catch, for some indication that Owen Irwin expected more from her than secretarial services. As if reading her thoughts, Owen's expression softened slightly. "Miss Jenkins, I understand your caution. A woman alone in this territory has reason to be wary of men offering assistance. But I assure you, my interest is purely professional. I need someone with your capabilities, and you need employment that treats you with dignity." Rosalie studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Thank you for your candor, Mr. Irwin. I accept the position on a trial basis, as you suggested." "Excellent." He extended his hand to shake on the agreement, then noticed her bandaged hands and withdrew it with an apologetic smile. "Perhaps we'll postpone that formality until you've healed." "Perhaps," she agreed, returning his smile tentatively. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Owen ran his ranch with fairness and efficiency. Rosalie's days were busy but not overwhelming, and for the first time in months, she felt her mind awakening from the stupor of exhaustion and despair. Her hands healed gradually under Ida's careful ministrations, the raw, cracked skin giving way to new pink flesh that was tender but no longer painful. As soon as she could manage it, Rosalie began writing letters to cattle brokers, supply merchants, and potential buyers for the ranch's future beef. Owen proved to be a patient teacher, explaining the intricacies of the cattle business without condescension. He was reserved by nature, rarely speaking of his past beyond vague references to his life in Chicago, but he was unfailingly courteous and considerate. Ranch hands began to arrive, weathered men with sun-creased faces and quiet competence. They lived in the bunkhouse and took their meals separately, but Owen insisted on knowing each by name and treating them with respect. A cook was hired for them, a grizzled former chuck wagon man named Charlie, who delighted in telling tall tales about his adventures on the trail. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Rosalie was working late in the study, finalizing an order for winter supplies. The days were still warm, but in the high country, winter could arrive suddenly, and Owen insisted on being prepared. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. "Come in," she called, expecting Ida with her customary evening tea. Instead, it was Owen who entered, carrying 2 cups. "I thought you might appreciate something stronger than tea," he said, placing one of the cups beside her ledger. "It's been a long day." Rosalie smiled her thanks and took a sip, surprised to find it was good whiskey mixed with honey. "This is nice." "My father's recipe," Owen said, leaning against the edge of the main desk. "He claimed it cured everything from a cough to a broken heart." "And did it?" "The cough, certainly," Owen replied with a rare smile. "The heart? Well, that's more complicated." Rosalie set down her pen, sensing an opening in his usual reserve. "You never speak of your family." Owen contemplated his drink. Not much to tell. My parents died when I was in my 20s. No siblings. I built a successful business in Chicago, but... He trailed off, his expression distant. But, she prompted gently. But success came at a price, he finished, meeting her eyes. I made choices I'm not proud of. Eventually, I decided I needed a fresh start somewhere far away from the temptations and complications of city life. So you chose to become a cattle rancher in Arizona Territory, Rosalie mused. That's quite a change. I spent summers on my uncle's farm as a boy, Owen explained. I always loved the open spaces, the connection to the land. When I heard the Matthews place was for sale, it seemed like Providence. And are you finding what you were looking for? Rosalie asked, genuinely curious. Owen considered the question seriously. I believe I am. There's a clarity here that I never found in Chicago. Problems are more straightforward: weather, cattle prices, water supply. Not the tangled webs of deception and greed that I encountered in business. The West has its share of deception and greed, Rosalie pointed out, thinking of Vernon Blake. True enough, Owen acknowledged. But at least here I can see it coming more clearly. He set down his cup. Speaking of clarity, I've been meaning to discuss something with you. Rosalie tensed slightly. Here it comes. She thought the catch she'd been waiting for. Your first month is nearly up, Owen continued. And I find your work more than satisfactory. I'd like to increase your wages to $35 monthly if you're agreeable to staying on. Relief and gratitude washed over her. That's very generous. I'd be happy to continue. Good. Owen hesitated, then added, there's something else. I've noticed you spending time in the library in the evenings. You enjoy reading. Very much, Rosalie admitted. My father always encouraged it. Books were the one luxury we always found money for, even when times were difficult. Owen nodded as if confirming something to himself. I'm going to Prescott next week on business. Would you be interested in accompanying me? There's a bookshop there you might enjoy, and I could use your assistance with some contracts I need to review. Rosalie was surprised by the invitation. I'd like that very much, she said after a moment's consideration. Good, Owen said again, pushing away from the desk. We'll leave Monday morning. He bid her good night and left the study, leaving Rosalie to wonder at the subtle shift she felt in their relationship. The trip to Prescott was Rosalie's first venture beyond the ranch since her arrival. She wore one of the new dresses Owen had arranged to be made for her in Williams, a forest green traveling suit that was practical yet flattering. As they traveled in Owen's buggy along the winding road through the pines, she found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of movement and freedom after years of confinement. Owen was a comfortable traveling companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing what he knew of the area's history. Occasionally, their conversation turned to more personal topics: favorite books, childhood memories, hopes for the future. Rosalie discovered that, beneath his reserved exterior, Owen possessed both intelligence and a dry wit that made her laugh. They reached Prescott by mid-afternoon and took rooms at the Palace Hotel, the finest establishment in the territorial capital. Owen had business meetings scheduled for the remainder of the day, so Rosalie was free to explore the town on her own. The bookshop I mentioned is just down Montezuma Street, Owen told her as they parted in the hotel lobby. Prescott Books. Tell Mr. Harrison I sent you. I will, Rosalie promised, secretly thrilled at the prospect of a few hours in a bookshop. What time shall I meet you for dinner? 7 o'clock in the hotel dining room, Owen replied. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small purse that clinked with coins. For the books, he explained when she looked puzzled. Consider it an advance on your salary. Rosalie started to protest, but Owen shook his head. A well-read assistant is a valuable asset. he said with a hint of a smile. I'm merely investing in the ranch's future success. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and departed, leaving her holding the purse and feeling a strange fluttering in her chest that had nothing to do with the prospect of new books. Prescott Books proved to be everything Rosalie had hoped for: a cozy establishment with floor-to-ceiling shelves and the comforting smell of paper and leather bindings. Mr. Harrison, the proprietor, was delighted to learn she came at Owen's recommendation. "Mr. Irwin has excellent taste in literature," he told her as he showed her around the shop. "His orders are always the highlight of my month." "Orders?" Rosalie asked, surprised. "He orders books regularly." "Oh my, yes," Mr. Harrison confirmed. "Every few weeks I send a package out to the ranch. Didn't you know? The library at the Matthews place, or the Irwin Ranch now, I suppose is largely his collection." Rosalie thought of the well-stocked shelves in the ranch house study and sitting room. She had assumed they belonged to the previous owner. "What kinds of books does he order?" she asked, curiosity piqued. "Everything from agricultural treatises to poetry," Mr. Harrison replied. "History, philosophy, novels. Mr. Irwin has quite broad tastes, much like yourself, I gather." Rosalie smiled. "My father was a teacher. He believed in a well-rounded education." "Then you'll feel right at home here," Mr. Harrison said, gesturing expansively. "Take your time. I'm at your disposal if you need assistance." 2 hours later, Rosalie emerged from the bookshop with a small stack of treasures: a volume of Tennyson's poetry, a novel by George Eliot, and a book on the natural history of the Arizona Territory. She felt light-hearted in a way she hadn't in years, buoyed by the simple pleasure of books and the freedom to choose them. She returned to the hotel with plenty of time to prepare for dinner, bathing and changing into the one formal gown that had been included in her new wardrobe, a deep blue silk that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. As she pinned her hair up, Rosalie caught herself smiling at her reflection, surprised to find that some of the gauntness had left her face during her weeks at the ranch. Good food and rest, and perhaps something else, something less tangible, had begun to restore her. Owen was waiting in the hotel lobby when she descended the stairs at 7. He stood as she approached, his expression warming as he took in her appearance. "You look lovely, Miss Jenkins," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "And thank you for the books. It was very generous. Did you find what you were looking for, and more?" she admitted with a smile. "Mr. Harrison speaks very highly of you." Owen offered his arm to escort her into the dining room. "He's a good man with an excellent establishment. One of the reasons I don't mind the trip to Prescott." The dining room of the Palace Hotel was the most elegant space Rosalie had been in since leaving the East as a child. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white-clothed tables, and a small ensemble played soft music in the corner. Owen led her to a table near a window overlooking the courthouse plaza, pulling out her chair with the easy grace of a man accustomed to fine dining. "This is beautiful," Rosalie said, looking around at the elegant surroundings. "Prescott tries hard to be civilized," Owen replied with a slight smile. "Governor's mansion, territorial offices, they have aspirations of grandeur." "And Williams?" she asked. "What are its aspirations?" "Progress, I suppose, with the railroad coming. Though I imagine Vernon Blake's aspirations are somewhat less lofty." The mention of Blake's name brought a shadow across Rosalie's mood. "I try not to think about him," she admitted. Owen studied her face. "I'm sorry to have brought up unpleasant memories." "No, it's all right," Rosalie assured him. "It's just strange to think that less than a month ago I was scrubbing his floors with bleeding hands, convinced I would never escape." Owen's expression hardened. Men like Blake survive by exploiting the vulnerable. It's not much different from what I saw in Chicago, just more direct and on a smaller scale. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the waiter. Owen ordered for both of them after consulting Rosalie's preferences a fine roast beef, vegetables, and a bottle of good red wine. As they ate, their talk turned to lighter topics: the books she had purchased, the contracts he had reviewed that afternoon, plans for the ranch. The cattle drive from Texas should arrive within 2 weeks, Owen told her as they lingered over dessert. Once they're settled, we'll need to brand them and take a full inventory. Hence the contracts you reviewed today, Rosalie guessed. Owen nodded, looking pleased at her quick understanding. Exactly. I've hired additional hands to help with the branding and fall roundup. It will be a busy time. I look forward to it, Rosalie said honestly. I've never seen a cattle drive or a roundup before. It's quite a spectacle, Owen assured her, though I expect I'll keep you busy with the accounts and correspondence while the men handle the cattle. Because I'm a woman? Rosalie asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Owen's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. Because you're valuable in the office and your hands have only just healed, he corrected gently. Though I won't deny there are certain traditional expectations about women's roles on a ranch. Traditional expectations didn't bring the railroad to Williams or build the Palace Hotel, Rosalie pointed out. The West is changing. So it is, Owen agreed, regarding her with what seemed like approval. And perhaps my ranch should reflect that. Would you like to learn more about the outdoor operations as well? I would, Rosalie admitted. Not that I'm dissatisfied with my current duties, she added hastily. I just believe in understanding the entire enterprise. A commendable attitude, Owen said, raising his wine glass in a small toast to her. I'll arrange for you to spend some time with the foreman when he arrives next week. Caleb Thornton, he's a good man, experienced, worked the cattle trails for 20 years. They lingered over coffee, the conversation flowing easily between them. When they finally rose to leave the dining room, Rosalie realized they had been talking for nearly 3 hours, yet it had seemed like no time at all. In the hotel lobby, Owen paused. I have one more meeting in the morning, then we can return to the ranch. Would you like to join me for breakfast at 8? I'd like that, Rosalie replied. Owen escorted her to the door of her room, maintaining a respectful distance. Good night, Miss Jenkins. I enjoyed our evening. As did I, she said softly. Good night, Mr. Irwin. Inside her room, Rosalie moved to the window, gazing out at the lights of Prescott. Something was changing between her and Owen, something subtle yet undeniable. She was no longer merely his employee, yet she wasn't sure what she was becoming instead. Friend, confidante, or something more, the thought should have alarmed her. After all, she had been in Arizona territory long enough to know that a woman alone had few protections if a man decided to take advantage. Yet she felt no fear when she thought of Owen Irwin. Despite the mystery that still surrounded parts of his past, she had come to trust his character through his actions, his fairness, his respect, his quiet kindness. With these thoughts circling in her mind, Rosalie prepared for bed, looking forward to the morning and the journey back to what she had, surprisingly quickly, begun to think of as home. The return trip to the ranch the following day was pleasant, though clouds gathering on the horizon suggested a change in the weather. Owen and Rosalie continued their easy conversation, discussing books, ranch business, and occasionally more personal matters. Rosalie found herself sharing stories of her childhood in the East and her father's dedication to education, while Owen spoke more of his uncle's farm and his early years in Chicago. You still haven't told me what kind of business you ran in Chicago, Rosalie noted as they passed through a stand of ponderosa pines. Owen's hands tightened slightly on the reins. Import and export, primarily. It started small, just me and a partner, but grew quickly. And that's where you made your fortune? Rosalie asked, gesturing vaguely to indicate the ranch and all it represented. A shadow crossed Owen's face. Part of it, he acknowledged. The rest came later through investments. He glanced at the sky. We should pick up the pace. That storm looks like it's moving faster than I expected. The subject was clearly closed, and Rosalie didn't press. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred not to discuss. She certainly did. They reached the ranch just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Owen helped Rosalie down from the buggy, then quickly led the horses into the barn while she hurried to the house. Ida greeted her warmly, already preparing a hearty dinner to welcome them back. "How was Prescott?" she asked as Rosalie removed her traveling coat. "Lovely," Rosalie replied. "We stayed at the Palace Hotel and dined in their restaurant." Ida raised an eyebrow. Rosalie felt a blush creeping up her neck. "Mr. Irwin and I," she clarified, though it was unnecessary. "A business dinner." "Of course," Ida said, her tone neutral though her eyes twinkled. "And did you enjoy your business dinner?" "Very much," Rosalie admitted. "Mr. Irwin is not what I expected when I first met him." "Few people are when you get to know them properly," Ida observed, turning back to her cooking. "He's a good man, though he carries burdens he doesn't speak of." Rosalie hung her coat on the peg by the door. "You know something of his past?" "Not much," Ida admitted. "Just what I observe. He came here looking for something, peace perhaps, or redemption. But it's not my place to speculate, and it shouldn't be yours either, Miss Jenkins. Time reveals what it will." With that enigmatic statement, Ida shooed Rosalie upstairs to freshen up before dinner, leaving her with even more questions about the man who had so dramatically altered her life. The promised storm arrived in full force that evening, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling around the eaves of the ranch house. After dinner, Owen invited Rosalie to join him in the study, where a fire burned cheerfully in the fireplace. "I thought you might like to see the books I ordered from Mr. Harrison last month," he said, indicating a crate on the floor near his desk. "They arrived while we were in Prescott." Rosalie knelt beside the crate, eager to see the contents. Inside were a dozen volumes, ranging from practical texts on agriculture to novels and poetry collections. One book in particular caught her eye, a beautiful edition of Shakespeare's sonnets bound in blue leather. "This is exquisite," she said, carefully removing it from the crate. Owen watched her, a pleased expression on his face. "I thought you might appreciate it. Your father taught Shakespeare, didn't he?" "He did," Rosalie confirmed, touched that Owen had remembered this detail from their conversations. "It was his favorite subject. He used to recite the sonnets from memory when we walked together in the evenings." She opened the volume, her fingers tracing the familiar words of Sonnet 116. "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments." "Would you read it?" Owen asked quietly. "I've always found poetry more affecting when read aloud." Rosalie hesitated only briefly before beginning to read, her voice soft but clear against the backdrop of rain and crackling fire. "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no. It is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Rosalie closed the book gently, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment felt, the two of them alone in the firelit study while storm raged outside. "Your father taught you well," Owen said, his voice lower than usual. "You read beautifully." "Thank you," Rosalie replied, carefully returning the book to the crate. "Shakespeare had much to say about the endurance of love." "Do you believe it?" Owen asked, surprising her. "That true love doesn't alter when circumstances change." Rosalie considered the question seriously. "I believe true love must be rare indeed if it never alters," she said finally. "People change. Circumstances change." Perhaps what Shakespeare meant is that the essence remains constant, even as its expression evolves. Owen nodded slowly. A wise interpretation. He moved to pour 2 small glasses of brandy, offering one to Rosalie. "To wisdom, then. And to evolution," she added, raising her glass in return. Their eyes met over the rims of their glasses, and Rosalie felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the brandy or the fire. Something was shifting between them, something neither had put into words but both increasingly acknowledged in these quiet moments. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, keeping everyone close to the ranch house. Rosalie used the time to catch up on correspondence and review the accounts, while Owen worked on plans for expanding the cattle operation once the Texas herd arrived. By evening, the rain had slowed to a gentle patter, and a knock at the front door announced the arrival of Caleb Thornton, the foreman Owen had hired to oversee the ranch operations. Thornton was a weathered man in his 40s with graying hair and the lean, tough physique of someone who had spent his life in the saddle. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct as Owen introduced him to Rosalie. "Miss Jenkins is my assistant," Owen explained. "She manages the accounts and correspondence, and she's expressed interest in learning more about the cattle operation as well." Thornton's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded respectfully. "Always good to understand all aspects of the business," he said. "I'd be happy to explain the workings of a roundup when the time comes." "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," Rosalie replied. "I look forward to it." Over dinner, Thornton shared news from his journey, conditions of the trails, cattle prices in Texas, rumors of trouble with rustlers near the New Mexico border. He was clearly experienced and knowledgeable, confirming Rosalie's impression that Owen chose his people carefully. "The drive should reach us in about 10 days, weather permitting," Thornton concluded as Ida served coffee after the meal. "I've hired good men, experienced drovers who know their business." "Excellent," Owen said. "We'll need to organize the branding as soon as they arrive." "Miss Jenkins has prepared a ledger system for recording each animal." Thornton glanced at Rosalie with newfound respect. "That'll be helpful. Most outfits keep poor records, in my experience." "The Irwin Ranch will be different," Owen stated firmly. Later, as Rosalie prepared for bed, she reflected on how quickly life could change. In just 1 month, she had gone from virtual slave to respected professional, from despair to hope, from isolation to what? She wasn't ready to name the feeling that stirred in her when Owen looked at her across the dinner table or asked her opinion on ranch matters. But it was there, growing stronger each day, as undeniable as the changing seasons. The next 10 days passed in a flurry of preparation for the cattle drive's arrival. Additional bunkhouses were readied for the drovers, supplies were ordered and delivered, and the branding irons with the new Irwin Ranch mark were forged by the blacksmith in Williams. Rosalie found herself busier than ever, coordinating these activities while maintaining the regular ranch accounts. Owen insisted she continue to work reasonable hours despite the increased workload, often stepping in to help with paperwork in the evenings. These evening sessions in the study became a cherished routine. They would work side by side at their respective desks until the tasks were complete, then often linger over coffee or brandy, discussing books, ideas, or plans for the ranch. Occasionally, one would read aloud from a favorite volume while the other listened, the simple pleasure of shared words creating a bond that grew stronger with each passing day. It was during one such evening that Owen finally spoke more openly about his past. "My business in Chicago," he began without preamble, setting down the account book he had been reviewing, "wasn't always conducted ethically." Rosalie set aside her own work, giving him her full attention. "What do you mean?" Owen stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkened landscape. "My partner and I began honestly enough importing goods from Europe, exporting American products, but as we grew more successful, we became greedy." He turned to face her. "We began smuggling, avoiding import taxes, dealing in goods of questionable origin. Eventually, we moved into areas that were clearly illegal." "What happened?" Rosalie asked quietly. "My partner was arrested. He implicated others, but protected me, took the blame for operations that had been my idea." Owen's face was grim in the lamplight. "He's in prison now, serving a 10-year sentence that should rightfully be shared between us." "And you came west," Rosalie concluded. "Not immediately," Owen corrected. "First, I sold the business, using much of the proceeds to provide for my partner's family. Then I tried to continue in Chicago, making legitimate investments, telling myself I had learned my lesson. But I couldn't escape the guilt or the reputation I had earned in certain circles." He moved back to his desk, his expression troubled. "So yes, I came west, not just for a fresh start, but as a kind of penance, to build something honest, something worthwhile." Rosalie considered his confession carefully. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "It can't have been easy to speak of this." "It wasn't," Owen admitted, "but you deserve to know the kind of man you're working for. I've tried to be honest in all my dealings here, but my fortune was built partly on dishonesty. I wouldn't blame you if that changed your opinion of me." "We all have pasts we're not proud of," Rosalie said softly. "What matters is what we choose to do with our second chances." Owen's gaze met hers, relief and something deeper reflected in his eyes. "You're very generous." "No," she countered. "Just someone who believes people can change." She smiled slightly. "After all, a month ago I was scrubbing floors in a saloon, convinced my life was over. Now I'm helping to build something worthwhile, as you put it." "You're a remarkable woman, Rosalie Jenkins," Owen said, using her first name for the first time. The sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her. "And you're a better man than you give yourself credit for, Owen Irwin," she replied, taking the same liberty. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken feelings. Finally, Owen cleared his throat. "It's getting late. We should both get some rest. Tomorrow will be busy." "Yes," Rosalie agreed, rising from her chair. "Good night, Owen." "Good night, Rosalie," he replied, the simple exchange of first names marking a subtle but significant shift in their relationship. The cattle drive arrived 2 days later, 500 head of Texas Longhorns, driven by a dozen weary drovers, led by a trail boss named Harlan Davis. The sight of so many cattle streaming into the valley below the ranch was exactly as spectacular as Owen had promised, a river of horns and hides flowing across the landscape, accompanied by clouds of dust and the shouts of men. Rosalie watched from the ranch house porch, fascinated by the controlled chaos as Thornton and his men directed the herd into holding pastures. Owen stood beside her, explaining the process and pointing out details she might have missed. They'll rest the herd for a day or two, he told her. Then we'll begin branding the unmarked cattle and rebranding the others with our mark. It's impressive, Rosalie said, watching the skill with which the cowboys handled their horses and the cattle. I had no idea it was such a coordinated effort. Wait until you see a roundup, Owen replied with a smile. This is just the beginning. The arrival of the cattle transformed the ranch overnight. The quiet routine of the past weeks gave way to constant activity, men coming and going at all hours, the bunkhouses full to capacity. Ida and her newly hired kitchen helpers working from dawn till well after dark to feed the hungry crew. Rosalie found herself drawn into the excitement, working alongside Owen to keep track of the operation. True to his word, Thornton took time to explain the finer points of cattle ranching to her, treating her with the same respect he showed Owen. 3 days after the herd's arrival, the branding began. Rosalie, at Owen's suggestion, rode out to the corrals to observe. She wore a split riding skirt Ida had helped her make, along with a sturdy shirt and a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun. The scene at the branding corrals was controlled chaos, bawling calves, shouting cowboys, the acrid smell of burning hair and hide as the branding irons did their work. Rosalie watched from a safe distance, impressed by the efficiency with which the men performed their tasks. "What do you think?" Owen asked, riding up beside her on his bay gelding. "It's fascinating," Rosalie replied honestly, "though I suspect the calves might disagree." Owen chuckled. "They certainly make their objections known." He dismounted and tied his horse to the corral fence, then offered to help Rosalie down from her own mount. She accepted his assistance, aware of the strength in his hands as he lifted her from the saddle. For a moment they stood close together, his hands lingering at her waist before he stepped back. "Would you like a closer look?" he asked, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Yes, please," Rosalie replied, equally affected by their brief contact. Owen led her to a section of fence where they could watch the branding without being in the way. He explained each step of the process, how the calves were separated from their mothers, roped, brought to the branding fire, marked, and then released back to the herd. "Each animal will be recorded in the ledgers you prepared," he told her. "Breed, approximate age, distinguishing marks, it all helps with management and prevents theft." "Theft is common?" Rosalie asked. "Rustling is always a concern," Owen confirmed. "Less so now than in the earlier days of the territory, but still a problem. A good record-keeping system is as important as armed guards in deterring thieves." They stayed at the corrals for over an hour, Rosalie absorbing every detail. She noticed the respect the ranch hands showed Owen, not the fearful deference she had seen men give Vernon Blake, but genuine regard for a boss who worked alongside them and knew the business from the ground up. As they prepared to return to the ranch house, Thornton approached them, wiping sweat from his brow. "Mr. Irwin," he called, "thought you should know Davis says there's word of trouble down near the border. Rustlers hit the Diamond K Ranch last week, took nearly 100 head. Owen frowned. "Anyone we know?" "No names mentioned, but Davis thinks it might be the Carson gang. They've been moving north, working their way up from Mexico." "Keep the men alert," Owen instructed. "Double the night guards on the herd and make sure everyone knows to report anything suspicious." "Already done," Thornton assured him. "Just thought you should be aware." As they rode back to the ranch house, Rosalie noticed Owen's preoccupied expression. "Are you concerned about these rustlers?" she asked. "Concerned enough to take precautions," he replied. "The Carson gang has a reputation for violence. They don't just steal cattle, they've been known to burn ranch buildings and harm anyone who gets in their way." "Should I be worried?" Owen glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "No." We're well prepared, and they typically target more isolated operations, but I'll feel better once our cattle are properly branded and accounted for." That evening, after dinner, Owen spent time checking his firearms and instructing the house staff on safety precautions. Rosalie watched him clean and load a Winchester rifle with practiced ease. Another glimpse of the complexity of the man, the cultured businessman who could quote Shakespeare, but also knew his way around weapons and cattle. "I don't expect trouble," Owen told her as he worked, "but it's best to be prepared." "My father kept a small revolver," Rosalie said, surprising herself with the admission. "After my mother died and we moved west, he taught me to shoot it when I was 14. Owen looked up from his work, eyebrows raised. "Were you a good shot?" "Decent enough," she replied with a small smile. "Though it's been years since I practiced." Owen considered this, then made a decision. "Tomorrow, if you're willing, I'll show you where we keep the firearms and make sure you remember how to use them. Not that you'll need to," he added quickly, "but knowledge is never wasted." "I'd appreciate that," Rosalie said, touched by his concern for her safety and his respect for her capabilities. The next day, true to his word, Owen took Rosalie to a quiet area behind the barn and spent an hour reviewing firearm safety and practice. He seemed impressed by her steady hand and accurate aim, though she was rusty after years without practice. "You're a natural," he commented as she hit 3 out of 5 targets. "Your father taught you well." "He believed women should be able to protect themselves," Rosalie explained, carefully setting the revolver down as Owen had shown her. "Especially in the territories." "A progressive view for his time," Owen observed. "He sounds like a remarkable man." "He was," Rosalie agreed softly. "He would have liked you, I think." Owen looked pleased at this assessment. "I would have liked to meet him." Their eyes met, and once again Rosalie felt that connection between them, something deeper than employer and employee, more significant than mere friendship. Before either could speak, however, they were interrupted by the arrival of a ranch hand with questions about the day's branding. The moment passed, but its impact lingered. As Rosalie returned to the house to resume her duties, she found herself thinking more and more about Owen Irwin not as her employer or benefactor, but as a man whose presence made her heart beat faster and whose rare smiles she treasured more each day. The branding continued for another week, with Rosalie dividing her time between the office work and occasional visits to observe the operations. Each evening, she and Owen would review the day's progress, their professional discussions increasingly interspersed with personal conversations. One night, as they sat in the study reviewing the cattle ledgers, Rosalie gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since their trip to Prescott. "Owen," she began, still finding it novel to use his first name, "may I ask you something personal?" He looked up from his paperwork, expression open. "Of course. Was there someone in Chicago, a wife or someone special?" She hesitated, suddenly embarrassed by her forwardness. "I'm sorry, that's too personal. Please forget I asked." "No," Owen said quietly. "It's a fair question." He set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "There was someone, years ago, Elizabeth. We were engaged briefly, but she broke it off when my business practices came under scrutiny. She didn't want to be associated with the scandal." "I'm sorry," Rosalie said sincerely. "Don't be," Owen replied with a slight shrug. "It was for the best. Elizabeth wanted social standing above all else. If it hadn't been the business scandal, it would have been something else eventually." "And since then?" Rosalie asked, unable to stop herself. Owen's gaze met hers directly. "No one of significance. My focus has been on rebuilding my life, establishing the ranch." He paused. "Until recently." The implication hung in the air between them. Rosalie's heart quickened. "And now?" she asked softly. Before Owen could answer, they were interrupted by a sharp knock at the study door. Thornton entered without waiting for a response, his expression grave. "Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Irwin, but we've got trouble." Two of the hands spotted strangers watching the herd from the ridge to the south. When approached, they rode off fast. Owen was on his feet immediately. "How many?" "Just two that our boys saw, but could be more nearby. Davis thinks it might be scouts for the Carson gang checking our defenses." "Double the night guards," Owen instructed. "Armed riders in pairs, and make sure everyone knows to avoid confrontation if possible. We want to deter them, not provoke a fight." "Already done," Thornton assured him. "But there's more. Word from town is that the Carson gang hit a homestead near Flagstaff 2 nights ago. Stole livestock and burned the place. Family barely got out alive." Rosalie felt a chill at this news. The danger suddenly seemed much more immediate. Owen's face hardened. "Send a rider to Williams first thing tomorrow. I want Sheriff Miller to know about the suspicious activity. And Thornton make sure every man is armed, even during the day." "Yes, sir." Thornton nodded respectfully to Rosalie before departing. Owen turned to her, concern evident in his expression. "I don't want to alarm you, but these men are dangerous. Until we're sure they've moved on, I'd like you to stay close to the house." "Of course," Rosalie agreed, understanding the seriousness of the situation. "Is there anything I can do to help? Keep Ida and the kitchen staff informed of the situation without causing panic," Owen suggested. "And perhaps we should postpone our discussion until a more appropriate time." Rosalie nodded, though she couldn't help feeling disappointed. They had been on the verge of something important, an acknowledgement of the feelings that had been growing between them for weeks. "Be careful," she said as Owen prepared to leave the study. "These men sound dangerous." "I will," he promised. "Lock your door tonight just as a precaution." The next few days passed in a state of heightened vigilance. The branding continued during the day, but with armed men keeping watch on the surrounding hills. At night, patrols circled the ranch buildings and cattle pastures, alert for any sign of intruders. Rosalie found it difficult to concentrate on her work, her thoughts constantly returning to Owen as he rode out with Thornton and the other men to check the property boundaries and ensure the cattle were secure. Each time he returned safely, she felt a relief that confirmed what she already knew in her heart. Her feelings for him had grown far beyond gratitude or friendship. 3 nights after the first sighting of strangers, Rosalie was awakened shortly after midnight by the sound of gunfire in the distance. She quickly pulled on a robe and hurried to the window, heart pounding as she saw men running toward the stables, weapons in hand. A knock at her door startled her. "Miss Jenkins." It was Ida, her voice tight with worry. "Mr. Irwin asked me to check on you. There's trouble with rustlers at the north pasture." Rosalie opened the door, finding the older woman fully dressed despite the late hour. "Is Owen all right?" "He's gone with the men to help," Ida replied. "He wanted me to tell you to stay inside, doors locked. Charlie and the cook's assistant are on the porch with shotguns just in case." More shots echoed in the distance, making both women flinch. "How many rustlers?" Rosalie asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Don't know for certain. Thornton spotted 6 or 7 trying to cut out a portion of the herd. Our boys interrupted them before they could get away with many cattle." Ida's expression was grim. "These Carson boys don't give up easily, though." "I'll get dressed," Rosalie decided. "In case we need to. In case there's a need to help." Ida nodded approvingly. "Good idea. I'll make coffee. Could be a long night." Rosalie dressed quickly in her most practical clothes, her mind filled with worry for Owen and the ranch hands. The shooting had stopped, but that could mean anything: victory, defeat, or a temporary lull in the confrontation. Downstairs, she found Ida in the kitchen, stoking the stove and preparing coffee as promised. The house felt eerily quiet after the earlier commotion, the silence broken only by the occasional murmur of voices from the men on the porch. "Anything new?" Rosalie asked, joining Ida at the stove. "Nothing yet," Ida replied, "but no more shooting, which is a good sign." They waited together in the kitchen, time crawling by with excruciating slowness. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably less than one, they heard hoofbeats in the yard and men's voices calling the all clear to the guards on the porch. Rosalie rushed to the door, Ida close behind. Men were dismounting in the yard, their faces grim but determined in the light of the lanterns. She searched anxiously for Owen, finally spotting him helping one of the ranch hands who appeared to be injured. "Owen," she called, hurrying down the porch steps without thinking. He looked up at the sound of her voice, relief crossing his features. "Rosalie, you should be inside. Is everyone all right? What happened?" She reached his side, noticing with alarm that his shirt was torn and there was blood on his sleeve. "We drove them off," he said, still supporting the injured cowboy. "Lost a few head of cattle, but it could have been much worse. Pete here took a bullet in the leg and Taylor got grazed, but no one was seriously hurt." "You're bleeding," Rosalie pointed out, touching his arm gently. "Just a scratch from riding through brush in the dark," Owen assured her. "Help me get Pete inside. Ida, we'll need hot water and bandages." The next hour was spent tending to the injured men. The cowboy named Pete had indeed been shot, though fortunately the bullet had passed clean through the fleshy part of his thigh without hitting bone or major blood vessels. Rosalie helped Ida clean and bandage the wound while Owen and Thornton conferred about strengthening their defenses. When the injured were settled and the ranch secure once more, Owen finally allowed Rosalie to examine his arm. As he had claimed, it was just a shallow cut, easily cleaned and bandaged. "You're handy in a crisis," he observed as she wrapped a clean cloth around his forearm. Not many women would remain so calm after a gunfight. "I'm not calm," Rosalie admitted, her hands betraying a slight tremor now that the immediate danger had passed. "I was terrified for you, for all of you." Owen caught her hand as she finished tying the bandage, holding it gently between both of his. "I'm sorry you had to experience this. It's not what I wanted for the ranch or for you." The kitchen was empty now, the others having retired or returned to their duties. In the quiet, intimate space, Rosalie found the courage to speak her heart. "Owen," she said softly, "when I came here, I was broken. You gave me more than employment or safety. You gave me back my dignity, my sense of worth." She met his gaze directly. "But what I feel for you now has nothing to do with gratitude. It's something else entirely." Owen's expression softened, his eyes warming with an emotion she had seen glimpses of but never so openly displayed. "Rosalie," he began, then paused, seeming to search for the right words. "When I brought you here, I had no intention. That is, I never expected. Nor did I," she assured him. "But life rarely follows our expectations, does it?" "No," he agreed, a smile finally breaking through his serious expression. "It certainly doesn't." He drew her gently closer, still holding her hand. "I find myself thinking of you constantly," he confessed. "Your intelligence, your courage, your kindness. I admire the woman you are, Rosalie Jenkins." "And I admire the man you are," she replied. "Not despite your past, but including it because it shaped the person you've become." Owen's free hand rose to touch her cheek, a feather-light caress that sent warmth cascading through her. "May I kiss you, Rosalie?" In answer, she leaned forward, closing the small distance between them. His lips met hers in a gentle, questioning touch that quickly deepened as she responded. It was nothing like the rough, unwanted advances she had dodged at the saloon. This was a meeting of equals, a shared desire that left her breathless when they finally parted. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," Owen admitted, his voice rougher than usual. "So have I," Rosalie confessed with a small laugh, "though I was hardly in a position to initiate it." "You are now," he pointed out. "Equal partners, remember." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by Thornton clearing his throat in the doorway. "Sorry to intrude," he said, looking slightly embarrassed but not surprised. "Just wanted to let you know the sheriff and his deputies arrived from Williams. They're ready to take statements about the rustlers when you're available, Mr. Irwin." "Thank you, Thornton. I'll be right there." After the foreman departed, Owen turned back to Rosalie. "Duty calls, it seems." "Go," she encouraged him. "I'll check on the injured men and make sure Ida has everything she needs." Owen nodded, but before leaving, he pulled her into another brief but fervent kiss. "We'll continue this discussion soon," he promised. "I'm counting on it," Rosalie replied, her heart lighter than it had been in years despite the night's dangers. The next few days were busy with the aftermath of the rustlers' attack. Sheriff Miller and his deputies patrolled the area, eventually tracking the Carson gang to a camp in the hills where a brief but intense gunfight resulted in 2 gang members captured, and the rest fleeing toward the New Mexico border. With the immediate threat diminished, the ranch returned to its regular routine. The branding was completed, and many of the extra hands departed, leaving a core crew to manage the day-to-day operations. Through it all, Rosalie and Owen found moments to be together, shared meals, evening walks, quiet conversations in the study. Their relationship evolved naturally from employer and employee to partners in every sense, their growing feelings expressed in both words and subtle touches. One evening, about a week after the rustler incident, Owen suggested a ride to a spot on the property Rosalie hadn't yet seen. "It's my favorite place on the ranch," he told her as they saddled their horses, "especially at sunset." They rode for about 20 minutes, following a trail that wound up into the pine-covered hills above the main ranch buildings. Eventually, they emerged into a small meadow perched on the edge of a ridge, offering a spectacular view of the valley below and the mountains beyond. "Oh," Rosalie breathed as they dismounted. "It's beautiful." The setting sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, the distant peaks glowing like embers against the darkening sky. Below, the ranch buildings looked like a miniature village, with cattle dotting the pastures like tiny specks. "I come here to think," Owen said, standing beside her at the edge of the meadow, "to remind myself why I came west, what I'm building here." "And what are you building?" Rosalie asked, turning to face him. "Originally, a cattle empire, I suppose, a legitimate business to replace what I'd lost in Chicago." He took her hands in his. "But now I'm hoping to build a life, Rosalie, a future that includes more than just cattle and profit." Her heart quickened at his words. "What kind of future do you envision?" In response, Owen reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "One that includes you, if you'll have me." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a beautiful sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I sent for it from Chicago after we grew closer." Rosalie stared at the ring, then at Owen's face, hardly daring to believe what was happening. "Rosalie Jenkins," Owen said formally, though his voice was rough with emotion. "I know our beginning was unusual. I know there are those who might say we haven't known each other long enough, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you and I want to share whatever future lies ahead with you as my wife. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Rosalie's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen Irwin." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. As if it had been made for her, then drew her into an embrace that spoke of passion and promise, and a future brighter than either could have imagined just months before. As the sun set behind the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they sealed their engagement with a kiss that held all the hope and love they had found in each other. Against all odds, the news of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and into Williams. Most reactions were positive. Ida was openly delighted. Thornton offered gruff congratulations, and the ranch hands seemed genuinely pleased for their boss and the woman who had earned their respect with her competence and kind manner. In town, however, the response was more mixed. Some welcomed the union as fitting for the prosperous new rancher and the teacher's daughter who had fallen on hard times. Others, particularly those who frequented the Silver Dollar Saloon, were less charitable in their assessments. Vernon Blake was among the most vocal critics. Bought herself a husband with her time on her back, he was overheard saying at the saloon one evening, loud enough for others to hear. Word of these slanders eventually reached the ranch, brought reluctantly by Charlie when he returned from picking up supplies in Williams. "Don't like repeating such filth," the old cook told Owen, "but thought you should know what that snake Blake is saying about Miss Jenkins." Owen's face darkened with anger, but Rosalie, who was present for the conversation, placed a calming hand on his arm. "It doesn't matter what Vernon Blake says," she insisted. "Those whose opinions I value know the truth." "It matters to me," Owen replied, his voice tight with controlled fury. "The man exploited you, threatened you, and now he dares to slander your name." "Owen," Rosalie said firmly, "I won't have you risking yourself over idle gossip. Vernon is just angry that he lost what he considered his property. His words can't hurt us unless we let them." Though Owen nodded reluctantly, Rosalie could tell the matter wasn't settled in his mind. She worried that his sense of justice, or perhaps his pride, would lead him to confront Blake, potentially causing more problems than it solved. Her concerns proved well-founded the following week when Owen announced he needed to go to Williams on business. "I'll accompany you," Rosalie offered immediately. "That's not necessary," Owen replied a little too quickly. "It's just routine business with the bank and a few suppliers. Even so, I'd like to come," she insisted. "I need to order fabric for my wedding dress, and Ida mentioned several household items we're running low on." Owen hesitated, clearly reluctant but unable to think of a reasonable objection. "Very well," he finally agreed, "but promise me you'll stay away from the Silver Dollar." "Gladly," Rosalie assured him. "I have no desire to ever set foot in that place again." They set out for Williams early the next morning, the journey passing pleasantly despite the underlying tension Rosalie could sense in Owen. In town, they separated briefly, Owen to conduct his business at the bank, Rosalie to visit the dressmaker and general store. They had agreed to meet for lunch at the hotel dining room, but when Rosalie arrived, Owen was nowhere to be found. After waiting 30 minutes, she began to worry. The bank was just across the street. His business there shouldn't have taken this long. A commotion outside drew her attention. Looking through the window, she saw a crowd gathering in front of the Silver Dollar Saloon. With a sinking feeling, she hurried outside and across the street, pushing through curious onlookers until she reached the front of the crowd. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. Owen stood facing Vernon Blake in the dusty street, both men tense with anger. "Take it back," Owen was saying, his voice dangerously quiet. "Apologize for what you've been saying about Miss Jenkins." Blake sneered, emboldened by whiskey and the audience. "Why should I? Everyone knows how she earned her keep at my establishment. Now she's just found a richer protector." Rosalie gasped at the crude implication. Several women in the crowd muttered disapprovingly, but no one intervened. That's a lie, Owen stated flatly. Miss Jenkins worked as a servant in your saloon, nothing more, and you worked her nearly to death for a debt that likely never existed. Now you're slandering her good name out of spite. She came to me willing enough after her father died, Blake countered, his bloodshot eyes darting to where Rosalie stood in the crowd. A nasty smile spread across his face when he spotted her. Ask her yourself if you don't believe me. Ask her what she was willing to do to keep a roof over her head. Before Owen could respond, Rosalie stepped forward, her head held high despite the humiliation burning in her chest. I never did anything shameful at the saloon, Mr. Blake, as you well know. I cleaned your floors until my hands bled. I washed your linens and served your customers food and drink. And for that honest labor, you paid me nothing while claiming my father's debt only grew larger. A murmur ran through the crowd. Blake's exploitation of vulnerable women and dishonest business practices were well known in Williams, but few had dared to confront him so directly. You're a liar and a thief, Vernon Blake, Rosalie continued, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet street. You profit from the misery of others and you think your money protects you from consequences. But the truth has a way of emerging, doesn't it? Blake's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little, he lunged forward, one hand raised as if to strike her. Owen moved with startling speed, catching Blake's arm before it could descend. That's enough, he said, his voice cold as steel. You won't touch her. Not now, not ever again. Blake tried to wrench his arm free, but Owen's grip was like iron. Let go of me, Irwin, or I swear you'll what? Owen demanded, finally releasing him with a slight push that sent Blake stumbling backward. Challenge me to a duel. Call the sheriff. Go ahead. I welcome the opportunity to make the truth about you public knowledge. The standoff might have escalated further if not for the timely arrival of Sheriff Miller, pushing through the crowd with a deputy at his side. What's going on here? He demanded, looking between the two men. Just a disagreement, Sheriff, Owen replied calmly. Mr. Blake has been spreading lies about my fiancée, Miss Jenkins. I asked him to stop. He refused. Miller sighed, clearly not surprised. Blake, this is the third complaint I've had about you this month. First the widow Simmons saying you cheated her boy out of his wages, then Thompson claiming you watered down his whiskey, now this. They're all liars, Blake protested, though with less conviction than before. Maybe so, Miller allowed, but where there's smoke, there's usually fire. I suggest you get back inside your saloon and cool off. And Irwin, I understand defending your lady's honor, but do it without disturbing the peace in my town, you hear? Perfectly, Sheriff, Owen agreed, turning away from Blake dismissively to offer Rosalie his arm. Shall we continue our day, my dear? As they walked away, Rosalie could feel the eyes of the townspeople on them, some curious, some sympathetic, others calculating. The confrontation would be the talk of Williams for weeks to come. I'm sorry, Owen said quietly once they were out of earshot. I know you didn't want me to confront him, but I couldn't let those slanders stand. I understand, Rosalie replied, squeezing his arm gently, though I wish it hadn't been quite so public. Perhaps that's for the best, Owen suggested. The truth needed to be heard by those who have been listening to Blake's lies. And now it has been. They completed their business in town without further incident, though Rosalie was acutely aware of the whispers and glances that followed them. By the time they headed back to the ranch late that afternoon, she was exhausted from the tension of the day. Are you all right? Owen asked as they left the town behind. I will be, Rosalie assured him. It was difficult hearing those things said about me in public, but also liberating in a way to finally confront Vernon directly. He won't trouble you again, Owen promised. I made sure of that after you went to the dressmaker. Rosalie glanced at him sharply. What do you mean? Owen's expression was grim but satisfied. I had a private word with Blake before I went to the bank. I informed him that if he continued to slander you, I would use my considerable resources to investigate his business practices thoroughly, particularly his bookkeeping, and how he acquires young women to work in his establishment. I also mentioned that I have contacts in the territorial government who might be interested in such findings. You threatened him, Rosalie summarized. I promised him consequences for his actions, Owen corrected. There's a difference. Rosalie couldn't help but smile slightly at his distinction. And how did he respond to these promised consequences? With bluster at first, then with a grudging agreement to keep your name out of his mouth in the future. Owen's expression softened as he looked at her. I know you're capable of fighting your own battles, Rosalie. You've proven that time and again, but some battles are easier fought together. You're right, she conceded, reaching across to take his hand. Thank you for standing beside me today. Always, he promised, and she knew he meant it. The weeks leading up to their wedding passed in a blur of activity. Owen insisted on a proper ceremony rather than a simple civil service, which meant preparations, a dress for Rosalie, new suits for Owen, invitations to friends and business associates, arrangements for food and music. They settled on a date in October, when the fall colors would be at their peak, and the weather still mild enough for an outdoor celebration at the ranch. Ida took charge of the household preparations with her customary efficiency, while Thornton ensured the ranch buildings and grounds would be presentable for guests. Rosalie continued her duties managing the ranch accounts, but much of her time was now devoted to creating a proper home with Owen. They spent evenings discussing changes to the house, which rooms would be theirs, how to redecorate spaces that still reflected old man Matthew's tastes, what furniture they might order from catalogs or commission from craftsmen in Prescott. Through it all, their relationship deepened, moving beyond the initial attraction to a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. They didn't always agree. Rosalie was more progressive in her views on certain issues, while Owen sometimes leaned toward traditional approaches, but they found ways to compromise and learn from each other's perspectives. 3 weeks before the wedding, a letter arrived that brought unexpected joy to Rosalie. It was from her father's younger brother, Uncle James, responding to a letter she had sent informing him of her engagement. My dearest niece, he wrote, your letter brought both tears and smiles. To learn you had suffered such hardship after my brother's passing grieves me deeply. Had I known, I would have come immediately to your aid. But to hear that you have found happiness and love with a man who clearly values your worth fills my heart with joy. Uncle James went on to explain that he had been traveling in Europe when Rosalie's father died, and subsequent letters sent to their last known address had been returned unopened. He had been searching for her without success until her letter reached him at his home in Boston. I shall, of course, attend your wedding, he concluded. Nothing could keep me away, and I bring with me a surprise that I believe will please you greatly, something your father entrusted to me years ago for safekeeping. What could it be? Rosalie wondered aloud after sharing the letter with Owen. Perhaps family heirlooms, Owen suggested, or documents of some kind. Whatever it is, having Uncle James at our wedding is gift enough, Rosalie said, wiping away tears of happiness. I thought I had no family left in the world. To discover otherwise just before we start our own family feels like a blessing. Owen pulled her into an embrace. It is a blessing, one of many we've been granted. Uncle James arrived a week before the wedding, a distinguished gentleman in his 50s with the same kind eyes and scholarly manner Rosalie remembered from her father. His surprise turned out to be a small trunk containing family treasures, her mother's jewelry, including her wedding ring, her father's books and personal papers, and most surprising of all, stock certificates from investments her father had made years earlier. He was always prudent about money, Uncle James explained as Rosalie examined the certificates in amazement. These investments were his way of providing for your future. I've been managing them in your absence, and they've done quite well. You're a wealthy woman in your own right, my dear. The news was stunning. The stocks, primarily in railroad companies and Eastern manufacturing concerns, were worth over $15,000, a small fortune by any standard. I don't know what to say, Rosalie managed, her hands shaking slightly as she held the documents. Say you'll use it wisely, her uncle suggested with a smile. Though from what I've observed of your fiancé and the operation you're building here together, I have no doubts on that score. Later, when she and Owen were alone, Rosalie was still processing the revelation. It changes things, she said uncertainly. Doesn't it? In what way? Owen asked, watching her carefully. I came to you with nothing, literally nothing but the clothes on my back. Now I discover I have means of my own. It shifts the balance somehow. Owen considered this thoughtfully. Does it? I never saw you as a charity case, Rosalie. I saw you as a woman of intelligence and character who deserved better than what life had handed her. That hasn't changed. But surely it affects how we approach our marriage, Rosalie pressed. Legally, once we're wed, my property becomes yours. Not necessarily, Owen countered. We can establish a separate estate for your inheritance if you prefer. The law allows for such arrangements, though they're not common. Rosalie was touched by his immediate understanding and acceptance. You wouldn't mind that my wife is financially independent, Owen smiled. On the contrary, I find it rather fitting. You've never been one to depend on others when you could stand on your own feet. It's one of the qualities I admire most in you. Relief washed over her. Thank you for understanding. It's not that I don't trust you with the money. You don't need to explain, Owen assured her. We'll speak with Judge Wilson when he comes for the wedding. He can draw up the necessary papers to protect your inheritance. This settled, they turned their attention back to the final wedding preparations. With Uncle James's help, Rosalie was able to add several personal touches that would have been beyond her means before, a string quartet from Prescott to provide music, finer wines for the reception, and small gifts for the ranch hands who had become like family. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the October sky a perfect backdrop for the ceremony planned for the meadow where Owen had proposed. Chairs had been arranged in neat rows, with an arch of autumn flowers marking the spot where they would exchange vows. In her room, Rosalie prepared with Ida's help, donning the wedding dress she had chosen, a gown of ivory silk with delicate lace trim, elegant but not ostentatious. Her mother's pearls adorned her neck, and her hair was arranged in a simple but flattering style, crowned with a circlet of small white roses. You look beautiful, Ida said, stepping back to admire her handiwork, like something from a painting. I feel beautiful, Rosalie admitted, studying her reflection in the mirror. The gaunt, exhausted young woman from the saloon was gone, replaced by someone serene and confident, her eyes bright with happiness rather than dulled by despair. A knock at the door announced Uncle James, come to escort her to the ceremony. My dear, he said, his voice thick with emotion as he saw her, your father would be so proud of the woman you've become. Do you think so? Rosalie asked, suddenly missing her father acutely on this important day. I know so, her uncle assured her. He always said you had your mother's beauty and his determination, a combination he considered unbeatable. He offered his arm. Shall we? Your groom awaits, and I believe he's as nervous as a schoolboy. Rosalie laughed at this image of the usually composed Owen. Then we shouldn't keep him waiting. The walk to the meadow was like a dream. Guests rose as she approached neighbors from surrounding ranches, businessmen from Williams and Prescott, ranch hands in their Sunday best. At the front, beneath the flower-adorned arch, stood Owen, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to wonder as he saw her. Judge Wilson, a friend of Owen's from Prescott, conducted the ceremony with dignity and warmth. The vows they exchanged were traditional but deeply felt, each word a promise neither took lightly. When Owen placed the simple gold band on Rosalie's finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady but his eyes shone with emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Wilson declared to the assembled guests. "Mr. Irwin, you may kiss your bride." The kiss they shared was both tender and passionate, a perfect balance of the respect and desire that had defined their relationship from the beginning. Applause erupted from the guests, joined by a few good-natured cheers from the ranch hands. The reception that followed was joyous good food, music, dancing, and conversation that continued well into the evening. As the celebration wound down, Owen led Rosalie away from the crowd to a quiet spot overlooking the ranch, now illuminated by moonlight and the distant glow of lanterns. "Happy?" he asked, drawing her close against the evening chill. "Completely," she assured him, resting her head against his shoulder. "I never imagined such happiness was possible." "Nor did I," Owen admitted. "When I came west, I was seeking redemption, a fresh start. I never expected to find love as well." "Life rarely follows our expectations," Rosalie reminded him, echoing words she had spoken months earlier in Ida's kitchen. "Thankfully," Owen agreed, turning to face her fully. "Mrs. Irwin," he said, testing the new name with evident pleasure. "Mr. Irwin," she replied, matching his tone. "Shall we begin our life together?" In answer, he kissed her again, a promise of all that was to come, the challenges they would face together, the family they hoped to build, the legacy they would create on the land that had brought them together. As they walked hand in hand back toward the house, their home, Rosalie couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come from that desperate day, when her bleeding hands clutched a scrub brush on the floor of the Silver Dollar Saloon. The journey had been unexpected and at times painful, but it had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to a future bright with promise. Behind them, the celebration continued. Voices and laughter carried on the night breeze like a blessing. Ahead lay their new life together, not perfect, surely, for no life ever is, but honest and hopeful and built on the strongest of foundations: mutual respect, shared purpose, and love that had been tested and proven true. Owen squeezed her hand gently as they reached the house. "Welcome home, Rosalie," he said softly. "I've been home since the day you brought me here," she replied, her heart full. "I just didn't know it yet." Together they crossed the threshold, leaving the past behind and stepping confidently into their future, a future neither could have imagined when their paths first crossed, yet one that now seemed as inevitable as the changing of seasons or the rising of the sun. Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter echoed across the ranch yard as Rosalie watched from the porch, smiling at the sight of Owen teaching their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. Nearby, their 5-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, named for Owen's mother, was already showing remarkable skill for her age, guiding her own pony in careful circles under Thornton's watchful eye. "Mama, look," Thomas called, his face alight with pride as the gentle pony took a few steps forward with Owen holding the lead rope. "I see you, darling," Rosalie called back. "You're doing wonderfully." At her side, Ida chuckled. "Another cowboy in the making," she observed. "That boy's going to be just like his father." God help us all, Rosalie joked, though her heart swelled with pride as she watched her family. The Irwin ranch had prospered beyond expectations in the 5 years since her marriage to Owen. The initial herd of 500 cattle had grown to over 3,000, making it one of the largest operations in northern Arizona. The railroad's arrival in Williams had opened new markets for their beef, and Owen's shrewd business sense had positioned them to take full advantage. Rosalie remained an active partner in the ranch operations, managing the accounts and correspondence while also raising their children. Her inheritance, maintained as separate property as Owen had suggested, had been partially invested in educational initiatives in Williams, a new school building, and a small library named in honor of her father. Vernon Blake had left Williams 3 years earlier, his saloon sold to new owners who transformed it into a respectable hotel. Rumors suggested he had fled to avoid mounting debts and allegations of fraud, but Rosalie paid little attention to such gossip. The past was behind her, and she preferred to focus on the present and future. "Mrs. Irwin," called Charlie from the kitchen doorway, "that pie you've got in the oven is smelling mighty fine. Thought you might want to check on it before it gets too brown." "Thank you, Charlie," Rosalie replied, rising from her chair. "I'd forgotten all about it with the riding lessons going on." In the kitchen, she found not only the apple pie she'd been baking but also a small package on the table with a note in Owen's handwriting. "For my love on the anniversary of our first meeting." Rosalie smiled, touched that Owen remembered the exact date he had walked into the Silver Dollar Saloon and changed her life forever. Opening the package, she found a delicate silver bracelet set with small sapphires that matched her engagement ring. "You like it?" Owen's voice came from the doorway where he stood, having left Thomas in Thornton's care. "It's beautiful," Rosalie said, extending her wrist so he could fasten it for her. "Thank you for remembering." "How could I forget?" he replied, his fingers lingering on her skin after securing the clasp. "It was the day my life truly began." "Mine too," she agreed softly, though I didn't realize it at the time. Owen drew her into an embrace, his arms as strong and secure as they had been that first day when he helped her from the saloon floor. "Any regrets?" he asked, the question a familiar one they asked each other on significant anniversaries. "Not one," Rosalie assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Every step led us here, even the painful ones." From the yard came shrieks of childish delight as Elizabeth demonstrated a new trick on her pony for her little brother. The sound pulled them both to the window, where they stood arm in arm, watching their children, the embodiment of their love and hope for the future. "We've built something good here," Owen observed, his voice reflective. "Something that will last." "Yes," Rosalie agreed, leaning into his embrace. "Something worthwhile." Behind them, the pie in the oven filled the kitchen with the scent of cinnamon and apples, a homely counterpoint to the grandeur of the ranch spread before them through the window. It was, Rosalie thought, the perfect balance, like their marriage itself, a blend of practical purpose and profound joy. "I love you, Rosalie Irwin," Owen said simply. "And I love you," she replied, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding day. "Always." Outside, life on the ranch continued its rhythmic pace, cattle grazing in distant pastures, hands going about their daily tasks, children growing and learning, all under the vast Arizona sky that had witnessed their journey from strangers to beloved partners. It was, Rosalie knew with absolute certainty, exactly where she was meant to be, not a victim of circumstance any longer, but the architect of her own destiny, alongside the man who had once said, "You work for me now, fair wages only," but who had given her so much more than merely fair compensation for her labor. He had given her respect, partnership, love, and in return, she had given the same, creating together a life neither could have imagined in those first uncertain days, but which now seemed as natural and necessary as breathing. Their story, like the land they tended, would continue to grow and flourish, rooted in the rich soil of shared experience and watered by the deep well of their enduring love.